This is Matthew Cratter from Bitcoin University, and today I wanted to talk about the dangers of taking profits on your Bitcoin. So let's examine this scenario. You buy one Bitcoin for $30,000 in 2023. By 2028, let's just say that one Bitcoin is now worth $1 million. I would say that's a pretty conservative price target. If you want to learn more about my price targets for Bitcoin, you can check out this video, which I'll link to in the description notes below, about what is Bitcoin's ultimate price target. Needless to say, when Bitcoin hits $1 million per coin, you're jumping up and down with excitement over the success of your investment, and so you decide to take some profits. You sell your Bitcoin for $1 million, and for the sake of this example, let's just ignore those nasty U.S. capital gains taxes for the moment, and let's assume that you live somewhere or have moved somewhere where you get to keep the whole $1 million. We'll also ignore the problems with the U.S. exit tax for now. If you happen to live in Colorado and ended up paying capital gains taxes, long-term capital gains taxes on this investment, you would pay combined state and federal $218,000. So taxes do take a big bite out of it. For now, we will ignore those. So what do you do with that $1 million proceeds after you sell your Bitcoin? Sure, you could blow it all on fast cars and fancy food and travel and things like this, but let's assume for this example that you'd like to remain wealthy and retired for a while and not immediately go back to being poor. So what do you do with that $1 million? Do you stick it in a bank? This is probably not a good idea if the global banking system continues to implode. And at $1 million Bitcoin, we can assume that the traditional fiat financial system is in big trouble in 2028. And this is one of the reasons that Bitcoin is trading at such a high price. The problem with putting your $1 million into the banking system is your savings account, your checking account, your CD could be frozen by the government in a crisis situation. I would just say, if you're enjoying this video so far, then please hit that subscribe button. This really helps the channel's reach. Hit the like button as well and leave a comment. This is what happened to people in Lebanon who kept their money in banks. Those banks, many of them closed and never opened up again. The other problem with putting your money into the banking system when there is a financial crisis, which we assume there will be, you may end up receiving a huge haircut of those holdings if the banks decide to do what's called a bail-in. A bailout is when the government prints up money and pays off the banks and helps the banks out. A bail-in is where they actually use depositors' money rather than taxpayer money or central bank money. And this is what actually happened to Cyprus and to holders of money in bank accounts in Cyprus in 2013, where they did a haircut. If you had more than 100,000 euros in the bank, then they would take 47.5% of that, everything above 100,000 euros. So this is what's called a bail-in, and it's basically a way that the government and the U.S. banking system, yet another way that they steal your savings. But let's assume for a moment that you do get lucky and your government and your bank do not outright confiscate your bank savings account or brokerage account. What should you do with that $1 million? Should you just stick it in a CD that yields 5% and live frugally off the annual proceeds, which would be $50,000, assuming no taxes on that forever? Not so fast, because if the central bank keeps its money printers going in order to finance government deficit spending, as is most certainly going to happen in the U.S., even in the U.S. this decade, because of our huge future entitlement spending and off-balance sheet debt, if the central bank keeps its money printers going, inflation will remain high and could end up going really, really, really high, much higher than it is now. In fact, it could go into the 10s, the 20s, the 50, 100% annual inflation, as we see in places like Argentina. If your country enters hyperinflation, that $1 million might only buy a loaf of bread in a few years. This is exactly what happened in Weimar Germany. We can see this path from gold being, I believe this is 1 ounce of gold or whatever the measurement is, 1 ounce of gold being worth 1 Weimar mark in 1914. And by the early 1920s, it was one ounce of gold bought you 1 trillion marks, papier marks, I think they were at that point. So you have to ask yourself, how would you have felt if you sold your gold for 80 papier marks in 1919, only to see the value of that same gold go to 1 trillion papier mark in just a few years later? This is the context of high inflation, where the right time to quote unquote take profits is never. In fact, what does it even mean to take profits if you're converting a fundamentally strong asset back into a weaker asset? For example, when's the right time to take profits on your US dollar position and convert it back to Turkish lira? We can see a chart here of the Turkish lira. When the chart goes up, that means the US dollar is strengthening against the lira. When the chart goes down, which it never seems to do, that means the lira is strengthening against the US dollar. But we can see how it's just continued to go straight up for the past 10 years. When's the right time to quote unquote take profits on your US dollar position and convert it back into Argentine pesos? Very similar chart where the US dollar essentially outperforms forever. You may have some volatility, you may have some very small drawdowns, but the right way to do this is never to trade back out of the Turkish lira or the never to trade back out of the dollar back into the Argentine peso or the Turkish lira. This is the same question. When's the right time to take profits on your gold and convert it to dog crap? Obviously, the answer to that is never, because gold will continue to go up forever in dog crap terms, just like Bitcoin will continue to go up forever in gold terms. Bitcoin has been outperforming gold since 2010 and will continue to do so. This is actually a log version of the Bitcoin gold chart just to make it a little easier to read, but we can see that it's a mistake to ever trade out of Bitcoin back into physical gold, because Bitcoin is a much harder, scarcer, more powerful asset. In fact, Bitcoin is the apex predator of all assets. And so the correct thing to do is to hold on to your strong asset, in this case Bitcoin, forever, and never quote unquote take profits into a weaker asset like the US dollar or the lira or the euro or the Australian dollar or the Japanese yen, etc. People who talk about quote unquote taking profits on their Bitcoin are still trapped in a fiat mindset. And this includes all the crypto trading people who understand nothing about the Bitcoin revolution. And so they continue to value their profits in fiat. What you should do instead is value your wealth in Bitcoin. Value your wealth in Bitcoin. Try to have the number of Bitcoin or the number of Satoshis that you own go up over time, regardless of the fiat price of those at the time. And it's okay, obviously, if you need to spend your Bitcoin, it's okay to shave some off now and then to buy some groceries or fuel or to help out a family member or friend. This is not to shame anyone who has real life expenses or just wants to buy something with their Bitcoin. But I do think you should try to keep your savings in Bitcoin for the long term, because Bitcoin cannot be censored, it cannot be debased, and Bitcoin is the best savings technology ever invented. And so if you quote unquote take profits from it, you will end up moving your savings from the best savings technology ever into an inferior savings technology like gold or fiat. Postscript, maybe you should just get clever, use that $1 million to buy a house or productive land instead. Possibly this could be a good idea depending on what's going on in your country. There are a couple problems with it though. Just be careful if you take this route that your $1 million house doesn't require a new roof a few years later into the hyperinflation, because that new roof could cost multiples of what your original house cost. We saw that chart of Weimar Germany and the collapsing purchasing power of the Papiermark. The same thing could happen with the US dollar, obviously, where you own this $1 million house, but a few years later, the roof starts to leak, you need a new roof, and that new roof costs $10 million, which you obviously do not have, and it would be very difficult to get because it's such a high multiple of what your initial wealth was when you took profits. The other thing as well, just be careful if you instead choose to buy some productive land with your $1 million, that it's not in a location where it can get overrun by starving mobs looking for food outside of the grocery stores that have been ravaged by hyperinflation. So take a good look at how close you are to metropolitan areas with very high populations that could spell out. Bitcoin, by contrast, is extremely portable, and it's great for these emergency situations in which you might just be better off leaving your country, wherever that is, when the ship hits the fan, and going somewhere that is safe for perhaps a Bitcoin country like El Salvador. And I think there'll be many of these citadel countries by the time we get to $2 million Bitcoin. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.